The problem is everyone says something different. Even science says something different depending on what you read. Should you cut or should you bulk? I decided to make this video because not only this is probably a question I get asked the most in gyms, but it's also a question I've asked myself many times over the years, going through different phases, different body compositions. Sometimes the answer felt obvious and sometimes not at all. So a lot of times I found myself going back to what research says, reading articles, checking forums, YouTube. And the problem is everyone says something different. Even science says something different depending on what you read. So recently I went back on YouTube and watched a few videos on this again because I tried to make content that brings value. And if I'm just repeating something that's already been said 100 times, what's the point? And I found out this had to be one of the most covered topics in fitness. Pretty much every fitness YouTuber has made a video on this. Some of them even more than once. So at first I thought, okay, I'm not gonna do it. But then after watching a few of them, I realized something. Most of them are focused on optimization. But optimization of what? Short-term results. And they completely ignore the most important part. Before going further, just quickly, in case someone watching doesn't really know what we mean by cut or bulk. If you already know this will take 20 seconds. It's very simple. A bulk is a phase where the goal is to build muscle, gain size, and even get stronger. To do that, you need to be in a caloric surplus, which basically means eating above your maintenance. Your maintenance is just the amount of calories your body needs to function and stay at the same weight for everything it does during the day. Breathe, move. A cut is the opposite. The goal is to lose fat while keeping as much muscle as possible. And for that, you need to be in a caloric deficit, which means eating below maintenance level. Now, how big that surplus or deficit should be, that's a different question. And this is actually one of the most important parts for doing this properly, but that's the topic for another video. So in theory, it's very simple. You eat more, you gain weight. You eat less, you lose weight. Although the reality is not as simple because of how big that surplus should be and because maintenance calories are not fixed. They change depending on your activity, your routine, your lifestyle. So trying to be too precise with your caloric intake is overkill because no matter how many variables you think you control, it's still all an estimation. But even with that, in some situations, what you should do is pretty obvious. If you're skinny, you need to gain some weight. If you have a lot of body fat, you need to lose some weight. No shit, Sherlock. In those cases, there's not really a question. The question comes when you're somewhere in between, whether you're skinny fat, a hybrid, you don't have much muscle yet, but you're not really lean either. Or you already have some muscle, but you're carrying more body fat than you'd like. Both cases, basically, you want both. You want to build muscle and lose fat. And that's where the real question comes. Should I bulk first or should I cut first? But the reality is, it's not just those two options. You actually have three ways to approach it. So the first option is to start with the cut. In many cases, this is what tends to be recommended, because at higher levels of body fat, your insulin level is usually lower, which means your body is not very efficient at handling nutrients. So by losing some fat first, you can actually improve how your body responds later and improve the conditions under where you'll build muscle. The downside is you're starting by reducing before you've built something underneath that you're satisfied with. So even if you lose fat, you might not like how you look. You might feel too small. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if you're not comfortable with it, it can be frustrating and harder to stick to. And in the gym, energy is lower, performance can drop, so you might feel weaker. And if you haven't built enough strength yet, that can be harder to accept. Which is why some people prefer to build first, which leads to the second option, to start with the bulk. Especially if your priority is performance, strength, progression. Here the idea is different. You're building first, because when you're eating more, building muscle is easier. You recover better, and performance in the gym tends to be higher. So you're able to push harder, build strength, and create a base first. And then later, when you cut, yes, your performance will drop, yes, you'll feel weaker, but you're coming down from a higher point. So it's usually easier to accept. But the downside is obvious. You'll gain some fat along the way, and if you already don't feel comfortable with your body fat, this can make it worse. But regardless of where you start, at some point you'll have to switch. Now, I won't go into too much detail in here because it's a topic on its own, but I think this video would feel incomplete if I didn't give at least some direction on when to switch. So there are a few physiological markers you can use as a guide. When you're bulking, as body fat goes up, insulin sensitivity tends to go down, which means your body becomes less efficient at using nutrients to build muscle. So in practice, once you start moving to higher ranges of body fat, somewhere around that 15 to 20% range where your abs are barely visible anymore, that's usually a good time to stop pushing a bulk and transition into a cut to avoid plateauing. And on the other side, when you're cutting, getting very lean, around 10% or below, it starts to come with trade-offs. Hormones, recovery, performance, all of that becomes harder to sustain. So going that lean can make sense short-term, but it's usually not where you want to stay for long. So that's how you approach it when you separate phases. And then there's third option, recomposition. Staying around maintenance and trying to improve both at the same time. And this is actually possible, especially if you're a beginner or if you have enough body fat, you can build muscle while losing fat. Now, this is where opinions start to diverge. Old school lifters don't even consider this option, but the strong advocates of body recomposition, often the so-called science-based lifters, say that the classic bulk cut approach is outdated. If you bulk, you build muscle, but you also gain fat. Then you need to cut to rebuild what you built, but you might lose some of that muscle. So they describe it as 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And if you look the other way around, cut first then bulk, it's 1 step back and 2 steps forwards. Whereas recomposition is seen as 1 step forward with no step back. In all 3 cases, you end up in the same place. Well, in theory. Because what's missing here is how it plays out over time. Because none of these studies really compare these approaches over longer periods, in real conditions. In my experience, recomposition is usually slower, especially if you're natural, and even slower as you become more advanced. You know, muscle growth is roughly logarithmic at first, then approaches as asymptote. So if you're a beginner, which most of these studies rely on, you will get the new big gains regardless of the method you choose, as long as you have some structure. And there's also another twist for recomposition. This approach also has a cost. It requires more precision, so you need to be much more consistent with the nutrition. With a bulk or a cut, you have more room to adjust along the way, but here, there's less margin for error. And if you're a beginner and you're still learning how to train, how to eat properly, adding that level of precision on top of everything else can make it harder than it needs to be. So if you look at what research says, it's not that there is one best approach. It's also not that we have no data, but there isn't a study that compares full approaches over time. Bulk first then cut first then bulk, or trying to do both at once and tells you which one is the most efficient overall. What we have instead are pieces of the puzzle. And that's where experience comes in, because in practice you start to see patterns. What works more consistently, what tends to break down, and what people actually stick to over time. So when you put everything together, there isn't one universal answer. It depends on your starting point, on your goal, on how you approach it. And that's exactly why focusing on what's most efficient is the wrong way to look at it. A better question is, which one can you actually stick to? If you start with a bulk, are you okay with gaining some fat? If not, you're gonna second guess it. If you start with a cut, are you okay with feeling smaller? If not, same problem. And I've been in that situation many times. And the times I made the least progress was not because I chose wrong. It's because I wasn't fully committed. And if you think about it, this is exactly the part that research and videos out there miss. They focus on what's best on paper, but not on what actually works in real life. And at the end of the day, it's not so much about choosing the best phase, it's about choosing the phase that fits you. And that's where I see a lot of people get it wrong. It's not that they choose the wrong approach, it's that they choose what doesn't fit. So they don't stay with it long enough. They start, then they second guess it, then they change something, and before anything has time to work, they're already doing something else. Look, over time you'll go through all those phases anyway, but not like that. Just give it time. The only way this can go wrong is if you pick something you're not comfortable with. So pick the approach that fits your life, the one that you're comfortable with, the one that matches your priorities. Enjoy it, enjoy the process, and you'll stay with it long enough to see it through. Because with a bit of structure and a bit of patience, things do work out. If you found this useful, you can leave a like. If not, feel free to dislike it and tell me what didn't land. And if this approach makes sense to you, you can subscribe. That's it.